It's a real problem.
Officer-involved shootings
in Bakersfield dealing with the police.
Are you more likely to get shot in Kern County than other parts of California?
Those decisions are going on in fractions of a second.
Justice! Organizers say protests like this demonstrate the disconnect between law enforcement and the public. But are the complaints warranted? I'm Kiyoshi Tamano. I'll break down the numbers statewide.
Off our street, no justice.
The protests have been loud and visible.
They're out to shoot to kill us.
I think there's a real problem there.
The critics?
A significant problem.
Outspoken.
It's obviously young men who are brown in color are getting killed disproportionately here, where at least the public pronouncements by law enforcement don't meet the facts.
Celebrity attorney Mark Garagos has represented the likes of Chris Brown and Michael Jackson. Now he and his firm are in Bakersfield with legal claims and lawsuits in 5 different cases, some against the county.
A small minority of people are driving towards police hatred, while the larger group of people who appreciate that I talk to day in and day out tell me we're doing a good job.
So who's right? We took a look at officer-involved shootings and found no one across the country is keeping accurate, consistent statistics. The FBI's database, for instance, relies on the country's 17,000 police departments to self-report. Many do not. So we called and put in formal requests. It took weeks, and some departments resisted. But we finally collected numbers from police agencies in California's 20 most populous cities. Bakersfield police had 33 shootings in the period we examined, January 2010 through October 1st of this year. Roughly 9 shootings for every 100,000 people. But the BPD didn't have the highest rate. In fact, Bakersfield came in 4th per capita. San Bernardino, with roughly 13 shootings for every 100,000 people, came in number 1. Though our count ended on October 1st before the mass shooters were killed in San Bernardino. Long Beach was number 2 with about 11 shootings per capita, and the city of Fresno was number 3 with roughly 10.
The fact that we're involved in many shootings has been asked several times.
But the chief says it isn't a case of cowboy justice.
We don't train to that, and we don't teach that mentality with our officers. We teach them to have an attitude of professionalism and character.
Garagos isn't buying that.
You can't just rubber stamp police shootings and say that's business as usual. You can't let the department clear themselves or investigate themselves.
When Bakersfield police officers fire, they are deadly. Our stats show 61% of our officer-involved shootings are fatal, the second highest rate in the state.
You look at each shooting as an individual event, and you look at, you have to get into the officer's mind, what the officer was thinking. Those questions are important. What was in your mind at the time that you pulled that trigger?
Our statewide survey measured only cities, comparing agencies with urban patrol areas. But as a point of information, the Kern Sheriff's Department had 34 shootings in the last 5 years. That's about the same as the BPD, but a direct comparison might not be valid, since the Sheriff's Department patrols a more rural jurisdiction.
I'm not anti-law enforcement, but law enforcement doesn't get a pass. They don't, because now people have cell phones, and because they now are exposed, or bad apples are exposed, that doesn't mean that you should wipe out your critical thinking.
Which brings us back to the streets, where protesters and family members of those shot by law enforcement say something more needs to be done.
They're out there terrorizing people. They're the terrorists here in Bakersfield.
As for Garagos' assertion that young men of color are being shot at a disproportionate rate, we found 22 of the 36 people involved in the BPD shootings over the last 5 years were Hispanic. That's roughly 61%. The census shows Hispanics make up about 52% of the county's population. Blacks made up about 11% of the shootings and roughly 6% of our local population.
It's painful. There's no glory in taking someone's life for using deadly force.
Kiyoshi Tamono, 17 News.
17's Kristen Price continues our in-depth look at officer-involved shootings with a closer look at the more prominent cases that still have many unanswered questions. Kristen?
Tammy, in almost all cases, officer-involved shootings have been ruled justified. But in some seemingly similar cases nationally, there are very different outcomes.
Oh my God, drop it! Drop it!
Officer-involved shootings in California and around the country are gaining national attention as protesters fill the streets. Days of civil unrest and protests launched the Black Lives Matter movement in Ferguson, Missouri, after unarmed teenager Michael Brown was shot and killed by a police officer. Citizens called for resignation of the mayor of Chicago after a white Chicago Police Department officer fatally shot a black teen 16 times last year. But officer-involved shootings in Kern County seem to go virtually unnoticed.
If you're from Bakersfield, you have this sense of it's business as usual.
In July 2010, 15-year-old Travion Avila was shot and killed by Bakersfield police after he led officers on a pursuit in a stolen vehicle. Avila wasn't armed. One of the officers who shot him, Timothy Birchtold, was involved in 2 other deadly shootings 2 months earlier. In May 2011, 4 deputies shot and killed a man in a wheelchair, threatening suicide. Deputies said 35-year-old Rodolfo Medrano wheeled toward them while holding a knife. Medrano's family expressed outrage in the days following the shooting over why less than deadly force wasn't used.
He can't walk. He's not going to get up and hop on one leg. He can't crawl. His knees are all messed up, you know what I mean? There was no way he could launch himself. You know, they could have used a canine unit, taser, or, you know, shot him, but they shot to kill.
Bakersfield police officers shot Ramiro James Villegas multiple times on the Mount Vernon off-ramp to Highway 178 last November after he led police on a chase. Officers said they shot Villegas after he reached into his waistband. Villegas was later found to be unarmed. 2 of the officers involved were in other deadly shootings. A senior officer who wasn't involved in the shootings retired after he was accused of cracking jokes and tickling Villegas' body at Kern Medical Center after the shooting.
Wrong movements, you get killed here in this town.
Nicole Ramirez's brother, Jorge Ramirez Jr., was shot and killed by Bakersfield police in 2013.
I don't understand how their procedures or how you take someone to a location and execute him and then justify that.
2 of the officers involved were involved in other deadly shootings. Families come together to protest these killings, but it's nowhere near pushback seen in other cities.
I think the geography being spread out, I think culturally being different than we would find in a major metropolitan area. And I think the fact that that Kern County employs a huge number of law enforcement officers, it's a major employer here, have kept this from being a big source of outcry.
From the grapes of wrath to the labor movement, Faith in Action member Marcus Duarte Smith says Kern County doesn't favor change.
We have a history of anti-protest in Kern County, and we're different than those big cities. We're more rural, we're more isolated. So the Tehachapi community is one community. You could argue that Delano, Rosedale, Cottonwood, the East Side, they're all their own isolated kind of islands. So the issues in the East Side don't affect the people in Seven Oaks, etc. We don't view ourselves as one when we should.
Faith in Action leader Marilyn Droppers says more transparency is needed.
We are not able to understand how the investigations were carried out. Eyewitnesses and family members paint a very different picture than we hear from law enforcement. It's happened not once, not twice, but repeatedly.
Duarte Smith says mass protests aren't necessarily the answer.
Faith in Action's goal has been to work with officers to bridge that gap in the community in order to try to avoid large protests and kind of destroying of the community that we've seen in places like Ferguson and other places that have that precipitating event that next thing you know, the youth have exploded. And there's chaos in the city.
Leaders are calling for independent investigations.
I don't think that the DA doing an independent review is an effective independent review. It's really the same organization looking at themselves.
Calling for the community to take action.
People are getting treated differently in this community, and maybe just because you haven't felt it, to judge that everyone's getting treated the same as you is incorrect.
In the meantime, families are left with many unanswered questions.
My son never came home. And that's what I'm dealing with and I'm struggling with, to believe that this department is doing the right thing.
All of these local officer-involved shootings were ruled justified, each by review boards made up of members inside their respective agencies. I'm Kristen Price, 17 News.
This is 17 News at 5:30.
New at 5:30, until this summer, reviews of officer and deputy-involved shootings were handled in-house at both the BPD and the Sheriff's Department. A team of senior colleagues was responsible in both departments for determining whether a shooting was justified by law enforcement and within agency policy.
But in July, the district attorney started performing a second independent review. As 17's Kiyoshi Tomono reports tonight, critics say that review isn't independent enough.
There's some bad policies that they have to change.
For critics, it's a common refrain.
To make sure that they are accountable, held accountable.
When they're protesting, what they're begging for, what they're crying out for is just change. They're not crying out for money. They're crying out for reform.
Ben Mycelis is an attorney representing a handful of families suing the BPD and Sheriff's Department over law enforcement shootings. His clients include the family of Jorge Ramirez, shot and killed in 2013 alongside a wanted felon in the parking lot of the Four Points Sheraton Hotel.
The two occupants of the suspect vehicle were struck and were pronounced deceased at the scene.
It wasn't until 22 days later, in an interview with 17 News,
I mean, it's worst case scenario.
Police Chief Greg Williamson made a stunning admission. Ramirez was an informant who was at the hotel with the full knowledge and support of his police handlers.
He put himself in this situation. He could have very easily got out of the car, put his hands up, said, I'm so-and-so, and put an end into that.
I don't think they would have released that information, absolutely not. But I'm not going to speculate. I can tell you what happened. What happened is that they did it. That was not what happened, and they knew right away.
I think I was as transparent as I could be in the situation, because while the administrative investigation is going on, I can't give you that information. I have to wait for the criminal investigation to be completed.
In July, the district attorney's office started conducting its own independent investigations into all law enforcement shootings in the county to determine if criminal charges should be filed. The DA in San Diego has been doing the same thing since the mid-1970s.
I think it was a progression that just came slower here, perhaps, than other counties in the state. Some of the other counties have more resources. We're very limited in what we can do.
Scott Spielman is assistant district attorney.
There are always those that are going to say that all we do is rubber stamp what the law enforcement does. But the fact of the matter is that we are an independent department, an independent agency.
Still, critics say that second set of eyes is not enough. The DA's office is still a branch of law enforcement. They seek an independent commission of trained citizens who can take a critical eye from the outside.
You'd have to understand that they wouldn't be getting all the information to make a intelligent decision, because we couldn't give them the administrative file without the federal government stepping in.
And the chief says it's a full-time commitment that shouldn't be placed in the hands of lay people. Not so, says Mycelis, whose clients insist someone from the outside must take a closer look.
They feel that they've been wronged, bullied, and quite frankly, they feel screwed. They feel that they're not getting information and the right type of intelligence, and they're not getting answers when they're asking very simple questions.
Our stories are the result of 5 months of data gathering from police agencies across the state. Some provided us that information up front. Others told us they needed extra time to compile that data. It underscores the criticism that police shootings are poorly tracked in this country, and there is no single place that keeps accurate statistics year after year. So we're going to do that ourselves here in Kern. 17 News has compiled a list and map of all BPD and deputy-involved shootings for the last 5 years. And we're working to contact every law enforcement agency across the county to add any additional shootings to our database as well. But this is an ongoing project, and we encourage you to help. If you know of an officer-involved shooting that's not on our list, send us a note through our website. We've created a digital form where you can fill it out, and we'll confirm your information and add it to our total. Then, while you are there, check out the list and interactive map of the shootings and review the sheriff's and police department's shooting review policies. You'll also find the entire unedited interview with Chief Greg Williamson and the data from our survey of shootings in California cities. Just visit our website, kerngoldenempire.com.